Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. The day has finally arrived. It is Thursday and our exciting EU DisinfoLab webinar is kicking off. Today organized with the generous support of the Heinrich Böll Foundation. Thank you. We are thrilled to see a great turnout for our webinar, Cleaning the Climate Advertising Industry. This event couldn't be more timely. Just yesterday, United Nations chief made a powerful statement saying that fossil fuel companies are, and I quote, the godfathers of climate chaos and should be banned in every country from advertising. Are these statements a game changer? I'm eager to hear the opinion of our speaker if what Antonio Gutierrez claimed could mark the beginning of something big. And further to that, discuss about the wave of skeptics, deniers, and conspiracists inundating social media since yesterday with really dubious comments on climate change. But before we begin, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping rules. So first, you should know that this session is being recorded and the replay will be available just in a couple of days on our website and on our YouTube channel. Also relevant to know, during the Q&A, we are going to use the tool Slido. You can already please start connecting to this tool by scanning the QR code that you see on the screen, or also by typing slido.com and using the hashtag disinfo. All right, so to kick things off and get familiar with the Slido tool, could you please let us know where you are joining us from today? Well, in the meantime, as you know, I will be serving as your moderator during this webinar. My name is Ana Romero. I am a researcher at EU DisinfoLab. So we have people coming from Brussels, Quebec, Helsinki, Porto, from Washington, Germany, Paris. Thank you very much and welcome everyone again. I have another question for you. Would you tell us from which sector are you coming? Which sector do you represent? Ooh, okay. So half of you are coming from no governmental organizations, good amount of people from media, academia, business. These are even. Thank you very much. Now, a warm welcome to our speaker, Duncan Meissel. I am particularly excited to have Duncan with us because he brings together expertise and action in a unique way. With a background in catalyzing social movements, he's now at the forefront of high-profile campaigns calling on the PR and advertising industry to drop their relationships, collaborations with fossil fuel companies. Duncan Meissel is Executive Director of Clean Creatives and has been named as one of Adweek's Young Influentials, Provoke Media's Innovator 25, Adweek's Sustainability Leaders, and Campaign's top 10 Trailblazers. Pretty impressive. PR and advertising firms have been cozying up to fossil fuel money for decades, hiding in the shadows. Today, Duncan will shed light on each and every one of them, exposing how collaborate with companies that pollute the most, with campaigns that claim to be greener than they are, which is a tactic known as greenwashing. But that's not all. The ad industry is also accountable for spreading disinformation about climate change, downplaying its importance, or even supporting climate denial. And let's not forget how PR firms are lobbying against climate regulators, swaying policymakers to stall or weaken climate actions. So thank you very much for joining us. And Duncan, all the way from Austin, Texas, thanks for getting up bright and early to share your experience and best practices with our European audience. The floor is yours for the next 35 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be here. I am calling from Austin, Texas, all the way in the United States. And I'm very grateful to be able to chat with y'all today. So I'm just going to do a few slides. I probably won't take the full 30 minutes, but I will do my best. So yes, I'm the executive director of Clean Creatives. We are an organization and movement that was started in late 2020 to get the advertising and PR industry to cut ties with fossil fuel companies. And the question of who am I and why am I here is a place I always like to start. And it actually has a lot to do with being from Austin, Texas. So Austin is a very progressive city in the United States. And in late 2020, there was an election happening in the United States, something we are unfortunately going through again. And during that period of time, the American Petroleum Institute, which is the world's oldest and largest pro-oil lobbying organization, was running a lot of ads trying to influence the outcome of that election. And being that it was also a pandemic, I was in my house in Austin and trying to figure out how to be useful, how to make a contribution to that conversation. And my thinking at the time with my colleague Jamie Henn was that we were going to find out who was running, who had made those ads, and we were going to make them feel really bad about themselves. And that was going to be the whole project, to see if we could expose this one campaign. But what we found out was that it was actually an agency in Austin, Texas, which is very striking to me. I know a lot of the kinds of people that live in Austin, and I know that they are probably not very aligned on a values level with, the American Petroleum Institute, which is primarily funded by people like Aramco and Exxon and Chevron, things like that. So that was very interesting and sort of like a sort of food for thought. And I realized, well, that's actually probably true in New York and Amsterdam and London and Los Angeles and all the places that the creative industry works. These are big cities with people who tend to support climate action and not support, climate denial. And so I just sort of was reflecting on that at the time. And then my colleague Jamie came across an ad from Philip Morris, the tobacco company, that was trying to talk about the quote smoke-free future. And the tobacco industry has been subject to a lot of restrictions on who will work with them in the ad industry and where they can run their ads. And that video, the ad that he found, it was so bad. It was just stock footage. It was bad writing. And I actually thought someone was trying to make fun of Philip Morris. I thought it was a joke. And you kind of put two and two together. It's like, okay, here's an industry that does not have access to the same creative resources it used to. And as a result, they're putting out this advertisement that's not able to persuade anybody. And, that also could be something that we could do with the fossil fuel industry. And you see me here in my Green New Deal shirt outside the White House in the United States. This is something I've been involved with for a long time, trying to pursue climate action. And when you do those projects for long enough, what you find is that every time you try to do something good, there's a lot of ads and PR campaigns that say to do something bad, and that those campaigns work. Greenwashing works, obstruction works. And so the goal of Clean Creatives is to see if we can get the ad industry out of doing this kind of work so that we can actually pass the things that we want to pass in Congress and in governments around the world. So to start, I always like to do Climate Change 101, just to provide sort of a background piece of information so that we're all on the same page about what is sort of the problem we are dealing with. First is that roughly 3/4 of dangerous carbon pollution is caused by the energy sector, and they're planning on increasing their pollution. So 3/4 of the problem we have to solve when it comes to climate change comes down to energy, oil, coal, gas. And if you go to those companies and you ask them, what are your plans for the next decade? They will pretty much all 2-in-1 say, we are going to increase the amount of coal, oil, and gas that we're producing, and we're going to pollute more. They've told that to regulators. They've told that to investors. Two is that we do not need those fossil fuel projects to meet global energy needs under the Paris Climate Agreement. All the increase in global energy demand, all our current demand, can be met by wind, solar, batteries, hydropower, all the other things that that produce clean energy. So that's good news. But back to bad news. Fossil fuel pollution right now is responsible for about 8.7 million premature deaths per year. That's mainly from cardiovascular disease, heart disease, lung disease, and that's actually more than the tobacco industry. And that's just premature deaths due to air pollution, rather than, and had nothing to do with climate change and the impacts of it. And then just last thing is that climate change is happening now. You can look around, you can see that it's very, very hot here in Texas right now. I know there's been extreme heat waves in Europe over the past few years. This is a problem we are actively dealing with. It is making people miserable today. And the core problem we are trying to solve at Clean Creatives is this. Fossil fuel companies are lying about everything. So every single misleading story about climate change that anyone believes in the world begins with an agency working for the fossil fuel industry. At some point, someone who works at a PR firm or an ad firm sat down with a major polluter and said, how are we going to get people to believe something different about this? And that goes back to doubt and denial. These are some classics from the 90s. It goes into current issues with delay, the idea that we don't need to transition off fossil fuels right now, that we can make them clean, that it's totally fine, we can keep burning natural gas, to fake solutions. This is from an Exxon ad where they said they were going to produce oil and gas from algae, which is something that they never planned on actually doing. We have emails internally where they said this is basically not real, but they ran hundreds of millions of dollars worth of marketing about it anyways. Also, just sort of greenwashing and purpose washing and all the very vague things that these industries tend to market themselves on. I don't know what a multiracial pregnant lesbian couple has to do with the energy company Chevron, but they put it in their ad anyways. And this comes up in a lot of their marketing, just these vague good feelings. So here's a sample of fossil fuel advertising. They show things that you generally like, you've seen before. You have your solar panels, you have nature, you have multiracial children, you have promises to invest in science and new technology. And what you might not know about all of these ads is that they have all been banned for being misleading. And this is a pretty typical, example of fossil fuel advertising, where pretty much all of it is false. I think this shows pretty accurately their trustworthiness. So looking at these ads and thinking about all of the fossil fuel marketing you see in the world, I like to ask this question. So in 2022, oil and gas companies made about $219 billion in profits in just 1 year. Based on these ads and the others you've seen, what percentage of that $219 billion do you think went to renewable energy or carbon capture and storage? Based on a percentage, just sort of put a number in the chat, in your mind, visualize that number. So the reality is, of that $219 billion, 1% of it went into renewable energy and carbon capture and storage. And this is usually more cynical than even the most cynical people in the room. The reality is that fossil fuel advertising is very different than what the industry actually spends its money on. They spend their money on expanding oil and gas production. And most of their claims about renewable energy are not based in reality. And here's a very specific case study of this. Last year, in the middle of the year, Shell told their investors that they were going to roll back their net zero pledge and go back to producing more oil and gas than ever. Instead of reducing the amount they produced, they were going to increase. That happened on June 14th. 2 days later, we looked in the Facebook advertising marketplace, and they were running ads talking about their 100% electricity plan, talking about electric vehicles. These were things that they had just voted to defund and to do less of, and they were already advertising about doing them anyways. In 2020 and 2021, 80% of Chevron ads mentioned something about sustainability, renewable energy, or the environment, something about clean. Less than 2% of their actual capital expenditures went to anything besides oil and gas projects in that same period of time. So when we say that the oil and gas industry is lying about everything, we truly mean it. They are lying about everything. And it's sort of a difficult thing to communicate because the depth and scope of the lies are so profound. But this is misinformation at a grand scale. So the people that make these possibles are advertising and PR agencies. The CEO Chevron is not sitting down and making that ad. an ad agency is. And the world's biggest ad agencies are all involved in this work. So we do research every year on something we call the F list, which is a comprehensive documentation of all of the known relationships between ad agencies and fossil fuel clients. And this is a sample of what we found. So WPP is the world's largest ad agency. They are a conglomerate that owns many ad firms, and they have dozens and dozens of relationships. These are some of their clients. Omnicom is the second biggest. Here are more of their clients. They particularly have big relationships with, with Exxon. BBDO is Exxon's main creative agency. You can see BHP, the coal producer. IPG is the creative and PR and media buying agency for Saudi Aramco, which is the world's largest oil and gas company. Publicis has really deep relationships, in particular with Total, which is another they're both French companies. Dentsu, which is based in Japan, is Chevron's main creative agency. Havas, this is kind of the last of the quote big five ad firms, just became Shell's media buying agency, despite having numerous B Corp subsidiaries. Those B Corps are now going to be working to buy and sell, or as part of Shell's biggest marketing budget or biggest marketing contract. And this is a pervasive issue across the biggest actors in the industry. And it has an impact. And now this is the part where I show some graphs. So right now, carbon pollution is at record levels. This is at 2021. If I had the updated graph, it would say the same thing. And you can see there are some dips along the way. Carbon pollution it's not just a straight line up. There's moments where there's recessions or pandemics or whatever. There's some reductions. And this graph looks a lot like another graph that was very interesting. So this is cigarette sales and lung cancer in the United States. And this graph looks a lot like the carbon emissions graph. There's some dips, but it's mostly going up until about 1970, where the United States bans cigarette ads on radio and television. And that's the sort of key decision here, because after that, this is what the graph looks like. The amount goes down pretty much permanently. And before that decision, there's basically no meaningful government actions to limit the use of cigarettes or where you could smoke them. And after that, there are dozens. The rate of consumption actually goes down. Without the power of persuasion behind them, the tobacco companies weren't able to stop the government from responding to a public health emergency. The same thing can happen with carbon pollution now. And that's really what we were trying to do with the fossil fuel industry. Right now, we're at the top of that graph. We need that graph to go down, and we need to enable government to take action with things like limiting internal combustion engine purchases, putting a price on carbon, having a global agreement on fossil fuels. And our hope is that without the power of the PR industry behind them, it will be much easier to push this agenda forward. So that's the theory of clean creatives. The fossil fuel industry is lying about everything. They're successfully blocking climate action today, and Clean Creatives is on a mission to fix it. So our main tool is that we ask agencies to take a pledge not to work with fossil fuel companies. This is the pledge, what the pledge covers. So the idea here is that we basically put guardrails in place for these companies to engage with energy companies to ensure that those clients are actually investing in the climate transition and not just greenwashing. We're putting the burden on the oil and gas and fossil fuel producers to prove that they are doing what it takes, which is investing the majority of their capital expenditures in renewable energy, and not just sort of saying nice things, then investing that 1% into renewable energy. And I'm excited that this has actually been very successful in terms of reaching people in the ad industry. Right now, there's over 1,100 agencies around the world in 64 different countries that have taken this pledge. Over 2,200 creatives who are either freelancers or employees in bigger agencies that have taken the pledge. We also have clients that are taking the pledge. And if you represent an NGO or a brand that hires agencies, we really recommend that you put as part of your request for information or your RFPs a plank of language that says we won't hire an agency that has a fossil fuel client on its roster. And I'll explain a little bit more about why that's important. So why is this working? What is the strategy here? I wanted to walk through kind of what we think about in terms of our strategy to help orient this conversation. So we have three pillars that we see as the key to making change in the creative industry. Pillar one is just reputation. If you're an ad agency or PR agency, you actually know the literal value of reputation better than anyone on earth. Most of them have some sort of financial metric that says the value of reputation is worth, this many $1 million. So we actually try to show how working with fossil fuels impacts their reputation. We provide transparency, being research via the F-list. That research is getting harder because most of these companies are trying to hide their relationships when they used to be fairly open about them. We identify legal and regulatory risks. So there are numerous lawsuits and greenwashing actions that are underway, or anti-greenwashing actions that are underway in places like the EU that could pose risks to agencies. We also do strategic public engagements where we try to educate the public and educate the industry about the issues of working with fossil fuel companies. So that's pillar one. The second place that we try to work is in organizing talent. So the creative industry is a talent-driven industry. They particularly need the talent of young people. And around half of young people have reported that they either have left jobs or would be willing to leave jobs over problems with environmental impact of those jobs. So we encourage employees to speak out. We have a guide to employee activism. We have something we call the True Unit, which is the people who are raising their hands inside these agencies to speak out and to take responsibility for trying to change them internally. We also work with students to get them to talk to recruiters and the people that are coming to their campuses to talk about getting them to join these agencies. And then the last is clients. The fossil fuel industry is ultimately a dying industry. It's not fun to work on. Other clients that are involved have significant leverage. So if you hire agencies and you're able to say, we're not going to work with people that have fossil fuel clients, that is a source of enormous power. And so we try to educate clients on the conflicts of interest. We try to help them collaborate. We collaborate with them on how to engage their agencies, what kinds of languages and tools to use to make an impact. So yeah, this is that hiring power is something that's enormously influential in driving out the fossil fuel industry. They're not going to last forever. It's not something they love, that employees love to work on. So if you can kind of give them an excuse, there's a lot of leverage there. And this is something that actually harms green brands. So if you're an advertiser that does have a genuine climate agenda, having like Seventh Generation, we work with them very closely. If you are marketing to the public, and there's a style associated with that, and then you have a company like BP, which doesn't have a meaningful climate target, that's able to do the same kind of marketing, one of two things is happening. Either there's cynicism, where individually people in the public sort of say, well, why should I believe any of these claims? Everyone makes this up. Or they believe both. The other thing that could happen is that consumers say, wow, this looks really cool. And it becomes harder to identify what a real climate solution is as a consumer. It's also the case that there is a sharing of intellectual resources. If you are a movement or an organization or an NGO that is working with an agency that has fossil fuel clients, and you are trying to help work with that agency to communicate about the climate or progressive environmental policy, those lessons, whether it's targeting information, strategic lessons, style choices, all of those lessons can then be taken across the hall and shared with the fossil fuel company. And then your work that you're doing with that agency becomes a vital part of the greenwashing effort. So the question people ask is like, can any of this work? Is this movement going to be successful? And I just wanted to share one story about how this has happened in the past. In 2015, the world's biggest PR firm, which is Edelman, was exposed for working extensively with companies involved in the Canadian tar sands, including TransCanada, the company that was promoting the Keystone Pipeline. Tar sands are the world's dirtiest oil. It is the most carbon intensive. This is a picture of production there. And this is part of a long-term relationship. Edelman has been working with the tar sands and with the American Petroleum Institute for tens of millions of dollars per year for decades. And this also happened to be the agency that Unilever worked with. And Unilever at the time was really pursuing, sustainability is a core part of their brand identity and purpose. Their CEO spoke with a journalist and said, he felt like he was subsidizing the tar sands. When he worked with Edelman, he was helping support the tar sands in pursuing this like very dirty climate agenda. And he called the CEO of Edelman, Richard Edelman, and just sort of said, this is a problem for us. We actually don't think that we can continue working together. And that one phone call led to a dramatic change. Edelman, which is the world's biggest PR firm, called it quits with American Petroleum Institute. Again, worked with for decades. At times is worth more than 10% of the company's revenue. And that one phone call led Edelman to exit that. So we think there's enormous power here. We think we can get some of the world's biggest companies to make a big difference. And I have an outdated quote from the UN Secretary General about this. He made a big speech about it yesterday, so I need to update these slides. But the future of creativity is clean. We think there's a real potential to make a difference in the creative industry and to make it harder for the world's dirtiest companies to mislead the public about their businesses. If you are a NGO or an agency or someone in the creative industry that would like to get involved, you can either scan that QR code, go to our website, or send me an email, and we can talk more. And thank you very much for letting me share this with you.
Thank you, Duncan, for sharing with us all this knowledge and examples. And your work, which honestly requires a good dose of bravery, because, well, you are putting yourself out there by speaking out against a really powerful industry. In a minute, we will start the Q&A session. Please remember to use Slido to raise any questions and add comments. You should see in your screen the QR code in a minute. Yep, there you have. So you can either scan the QR code or join at slido.com #disinfo. But first, Duncan, while our audience raise questions, I'd love you to give us your opinion on UN chief statement yesterday calling for governments bans on fossil fuel advertising and for public relations and media companies to cut ties with oil, gas, and coal interests in general. Can we expect something good, positive, coming out of this in the near future?
So I think the UN Secretary General's speech yesterday was historic. I think it is very powerful. I think this is a very core. So fossil fuel PR and advertising has been an essential part of the fossil fuel industry's work for decades. They knew about climate change in the 1970s, and they've spent 50 years trying to cover up the evidence of what their products are doing to the planet. And that has all been enabled by PR and advertising. So I think the fact that the world's top diplomat has named the industry by name means that relationship is fundamentally changed. They are not going to be able to do the same kind of work they've done in the past. There will be more scrutiny from regulators. There will be more scrutiny from other actors by their clients, by their employees. It's something that is absolutely unavoidable. So I think it's a big turning point. And I think you will see more clients, in particular, more brands or foundations that hire agencies start to ask this question in a way that will make change happen very quickly. So I think it's a great step forward, and it's one speech. It doesn't sort of change the world in itself, but I think it gives the green light to a lot more pressure.
Indeed. I also noticed that it's not that they were silent before, but the number of denialist messages on social networks and all this fossil fuel content after yesterday's UN chief statement, well, it's overwhelming. And why do you think climate change denial still thrives online? Do you think there is a kind of coordinated campaign?
Oh, we know they're coordinated campaigns. I mean, for last year at the UN climate talks, which were held in the Emirates in the Gulf, there was a coordinated effort on the part to build up the CEO of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company was also the CEO of the climate talks, which is an extreme conflict of interest, which is a real problem. And we could see the coordinated bot activity wasn't even very sophisticated to build him up to respond to critics. And that's kind of the most high profile example of a fossil fuel CEO just directly using those tools to push their message forward. We know, I mean, it was recently found out that FTI, which is a big PR company, and was just sort of, we kind of don't know all the details for sure, but there was extremely coordinated harassment, hacking of critics of Exxon starting in 2015. After a bunch of documents were released showing Exxon's history of climate denial and the fact what they knew about climate science starting in the 70s. All of a sudden, there was a coordinated hacking activity targeting the people that were criticizing the Exxon. Those emails were released and turned into an online harassment campaign. And all evidence seems to suggest that two PR companies, FTI and DDC, were directly involved in that hacking operation. They were hired by Exxon at the same time. They've been involved with it. They had connections to the hacking firm that has been convicted of those break-ins. The sort of exact relationship there is not known, but seems very, very suggestive. So yeah, there's the coordinated disinformation targeting of activists is the bread and butter of this industry. This is what they do.
But there are no legal actions against these kind of campaigns, coordinated campaigns?
There has been legal action against the hacker that did the hacking of the emails. And we know that that hacker has longstanding financial ties with the PR companies that have longstanding ties with Exxon and were hired to respond to this campaign. But they seem to suggest that just because all of these critics of Exxon had their emails hacked and released doesn't necessarily mean that Exxon didn't have anything to do with it, which is a pretty suspicious argument in my mind.
So sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's very illustrative. I am very happy now to open Q&A. We have good time to discuss things with our dear audience. Let's go for the first question on top. Duncan, how much has this way of false advertising been picked up by other environmentally destructive sectors? Can you give us examples?
Yes. So what's interesting also is that the disinformation strategies of the fossil fuel industry were also kind of a product of other industries as well. So there is a long history of the PR industry working with fossil fuels. I mean, you can find examples of this from 1912 when Rockefeller, John D. Rockefeller, the original Rockefeller, Standard Oil, was working with the person who invented press releases to respond to environmental disasters and labor disputes. So there's a long history of the fossil fuel industry working with these with PR. But also a lot of the strategy, particularly around denial and the politicization of this, came from work with the tobacco industry. That tobacco, when they were facing regulations in the 80s and 90s, used a lot of this fake science, grassroots organizations designed to harass politicians or scientists themselves. There's also the fact that one of the largest climate denial organizations in the United States is called the Heartland Institute. Their email list, their contact list, their fundraising list was provided to them by the tobacco industry. The tobacco industry had gone around and spoken with a bunch of smokers and said, protect your right to smoke, blah, 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 and done a lot of this disinformation tactics. And then when the Heartland Institute tried to start to get into, and that's where Heartland started, when they tried to start to get into climate denial, just the same organization, the same people, the same contact lists, it was a one-to-one strategy. And there's a great website called Smoke and Fumes, which is an archive of documents related to tobacco science denial and climate science denial, and it shows the parallel strategies that they took to actually pursue essentially the same strategies. So yes, there's a long history here. I've started to see a lot of the same tactics, and I think in some ways more aggressive and more advanced around animal agriculture has been a bigger thing. You know, I attended a conference called the Sustainable Brands Conference last year to kind of talk about this issue, and the biggest sponsors, the biggest stages. It was Monsanto, it was pork producers, it was meat producers. They are all, I think, extremely on notice about the potential risks to their business and are using a lot of the same tools right now.
This is very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to jump this question about KLM. I'm going to go for the third one because it's very related to your job. Would you say name and shame it's a good strategy?
I think naming is only effective if people feel shame. And so, you know, our approach is to provide transparency. You know, the F list is, we don't do any, you know, all the things that we convey are meant to be grounded in facts. You know, we don't call people climate criminals. We don't go out of our way to show up at people's houses or, you know, harass them online or anything like that. Like, we provide transparency because the information that we think is extremely relevant to people in the ad industry. You know, we know that young people who are creative, who are good communicators, they care about climate change. And so they should know when they go into an agency and they consider being hired there, what clients they're going to be asked to work on. That's extremely relevant. It's extremely relevant to a clean brand, whether or not they should be involved with an agency that might use their insights to promote fossil fuel companies. That's just information that's relevant to their business, and we want to provide that. So, you know, I think what's unique about the creative industry is that it's people who, to be a good communicator, you have to have empathy. You have to actually be able to understand the mindset of the people you're trying to reach. And I think that makes them particularly susceptible to this kind of communication, this kind of conversation. Susceptible is a bad word for having empathy. Everyone should have empathy, but I think it means they're open to it. And I think that's why this has been something that's moved very quickly through the industry. So I think it works in this context. There's different tools for different moments. But, you know, ultimately, I think we're going to see a lot of change here because the people in the creative industry care, because it's important to them. And that's what will matter.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'm very interested in launching this question, which is a bit provocative. Would you say that climate organizations need to be more hardcore and copying those PR strategies and fake information from fossil fuel industry?
No, I don't think we should be lying to people about our tools. I mean, I think uh, fundamentally, like the tactics the fossil fuel industry use are meant to defend an incumbent industry. They're meant to defend the powerful and the rich, and they're effective because they have relationships and because they have power and influence, not necessarily because the tactics themselves are extremely relevant. So no, I don't think that's important. However, I will say that I believe that some of the lessons and insights that the PR and advertising industry offers to their commercial clients are something that the nonprofits and climate organizations should use more often. So there's you know, I've worked at NGOs for a long time, and there's a lot of ways in which you can use communication to persuade yourself and not really persuade anyone else in the public. And I think there's a level of integrity and honesty that comes from working with a commercial client where, did we sell something or did we not sell it, is very clear answer. And the lines of accountability are much stronger for people who aren't successful in their communication. And I think that sort of honesty and forthrightness and tools that they've developed in order to accomplish those goals are very relevant to our work. And I think people would benefit from using that mindset more often. So I think that, you know, we love collaborating with the agencies who have signed the Clean Creatives Pledge. They are awesome at what they do. And by the way, if you are interested in working with some of them and would like to have a clean agency be one of your collaborators, we are very happy to help you find a good agency to work with. There's lots of them who are great. So we like to be that connector, use some of those tools, but no, I don't think that misinformation should be a tool for the climate movement.
Thank you for this support. Is there any overlapping between classic fossil fuel companies advertising carried through ad agencies and state-sponsored disinformation? And also, if you can give some examples, if any.
Yes, I mentioned before the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. There's a lot of these petrostates that there is no difference between the fossil fuel company and the state-sponsored disinformation. They are one and the same. I mean, Saudi Aramco is the Saudi government. So there's some layer at which like these just are the same tools because they're the same companies. I think you will find a lot of the same names behind the state-sponsored disinformation and the fossil fuel disinformation. So, we see just because like a lot of, if we're talking about state-sponsored disinformation, a lot of the states doing it are petrostates themselves. Russia is a petrostate. Saudi Arabia is a petrostate. They are using the same agencies. They are using a lot of the same tools. Like there's just not really a firm line between those two, I guess. So obviously there's examples of like state disinformation that aren't those petrostates, but at its core, I think a lot of these tactics are pioneered by oil and gas countries in order to defend their fossil fuel interests.
Okay, I'm looking for a follow-up question because I think I saw, all right, this somehow could work. What's your take on self-regulation of the ads industry? Some people think that governments have to intervene as little as possible.
What we're doing at Clean Korea is self-regulation. So on that level, like that's, we're asking agencies to take this pledge and commit to do it. So, I don't think that we see that as a problem on its own. I think there's a role for social pressure and governments, social pressure before governments intervene that could be really powerful. I am in the United States, and we have very strong norms against government intervention on speech, which I think are in many ways quite valid. But there is great precedent for governments, even in places like the United States, for limiting the marketing of dangerous products. And I think that's the way to look at this. Oil and gas is a dangerous product. It's the most dangerous product from a certain perspective. It's causing 9 million people to die from air pollution every single year. It's pushing all of our planetary systems that provide us food to the brink of collapse. So if you think of this as a dangerous product, it's no different than limiting the marketing of any other dangerous product like tobacco or guns or there's all sorts of limits on what you can and can't market in certain places because we've decided it's inappropriate to be able to market anything at any time. So I'm very open to this. Is just I think look at this as essentially a consumer fraud problem. Here's a product that the companies know is dangerous. They have research on it that's existed for decades. They know that it is harming the planet. They know it's harming their consumers. Why are you allowed to market it? To the degree that they need it, they can still buy it, but you don't have a right to market something that is dangerous.
Yeah, we have this question that I think it's already replied right now, but let me read it in case you want to add something else. It seems that Dutch Minister for Climate expressed concerns about a ban on fossil fuel ads for violating European Union market law, the freedom to provide services. How to explain that he is wrong?
I do not know the answer to that because I'm not that familiar with EU market law, but I know some people who would be happy to help. So if you want to contact me, I can connect you with the Dutch reclaim ban anti-fossil fuel movement there. They're wonderful and very good at what they do. And they've been working on this KLM case that's been on the screen as well. So if you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to make that introduction and connect you with them because they're really great at what they do.
That's lovely. Thank you. Duncan, we have another question. What can public authorities, cities, do to limit the visibility of fossil fuel industry on residents?
So there are a lot of different tools. So a lot of public space is publicly owned. Marketing space in cities, bus stations, public transit, it tends to be city owned, and there's rules that you can just sort of say, I don't want this marketing on my property as the city. There are limitations on the size and spacing of billboards and marketing. There's a great organization called Ad Free Cities that is working on this specifically, about what public authorities and cities can do. That's less of our expertise. We really do try to focus on the ad industry itself, and the sort of actors within the creative industry. But I recommend connecting with Ad Free Cities to talk more about that. They have a great set of tools that are being applied in lots of different places. Edinburgh in Scotland just passed a law essentially banning fossil fuel ads within city limits, which is a very interesting development. And then in other places, on any sort of public space, both in the United States and elsewhere, on those publicly owned advertisement spaces, there's lots of other rules that have been passed by different cities.
Interesting. So let's go for this question because it's been there for a while. Last March, historic win against greenwashing. KLM's advertising was ruled illegal. Is this also happening in the US? Just in case you don't know, so it seems that the court said that KLM's sustainability advertising breached EU consumer law, and this set, I'd say, international precedent for the aviation industry.
It's not happening in the US yet. We don't have that same sort of regulatory. Our regulation is much slower and much less focused, or being able to make those kinds of responses. What's interesting about, but there is also developments in the UK and Singapore, interestingly, where this is coming up more. And what those cases are doing that I think is really important for the fossil fuel industry and for a lot of industry is they've kind of picked out two things that are particularly misleading that these industries tend to use a lot. One is the use of offsetting. So yes, we're polluting, but we're planting some trees somewhere at some point, so it's fine. And there's increasing restriction on that, which I think is very positive. And then second is that they're limiting the ability to market small parts of your company as if they are the big part of your company. So, all these fossil fuel companies, they do have that 1% that they'll spend on wind turbines or solar panels or whatever. And what a lot of the new rules are beginning to address is saying, well, you can't just market as if this is your whole company. You can't tell people, like, look at our solar panels when 99% of your company is oil and gas. And that kind of picking out of, you can't misrepresent the substance of what you do by picking and choosing what you market so dramatically, I think is really positive as well. And so, as a counterpoint to this, France passed a law that said you can't market oil and gas in France. And, obviously that's positive. We don't want people to be going around and saying oil and gas is great because it's not, it's dangerous. They know that. But at the same time, what it allows is for a company like Total to say, here's our clean energy. And that's actually kind of the problem. The problem is that they're not a clean energy company, and they're making people think that they are. And so it's kind of a very powerful loophole there, where saying, yes, you can still market your clean energy products. Well, those clean energy products aren't actually what the company primarily sells, and you're misleading the public into thinking that your company does something that it does not. So that's kind of the counterpoint to this, in a different framework of regulation that I think has been less successful.
Thank you, Duncan. Let's move to social media. Oil industry uses social media to influence public opinion on climate and energy transition with micro-target ads technique. No one can escape from their messages. And then there is another comment on this question. Unless micro-marketing gets banned, what's your take on micro-targeting from an PR point of view?
It sort of depends on what you mean by market targeting. There's a lot of ways that can work or not work. I really recommend that people look in the Facebook ad library and the Google ad library to kind of get a sense of how these companies are targeting people. There is funny, like, in Texas, in the United States, there's a lot of oil and gas. There's a lot of oil production here. And there's a surprising amount of oil and gas marketing that happens here as well. And it's kind of to support people, to make them feel good about the work that they're doing. So it's not always trying to influence the undecided. Sometimes it's just trying to encourage the already converted and keep them excited and committed to your work. So I wouldn't say that no one can escape it. I think that's probably overstating the power of these tools. I think it is effective, but they aren't mind control devices. They aren't able to totally manipulate people into absolute compliance, but they are powerful. We can also target people in really effective ways. Social movements still work. Influencer engagement still works. We have lots of tools to respond to it. Yes, they use these tools, but they aren't all powerful.
Thank you. We have two more questions. Good communications and empathy are key for climate communication. Can you elaborate on the motions you think is most successful to mobilize public audience?
Yes, there are two things that are most associated with long-term public engagement on climate change. Emotionally speaking, the emotion you want to speak to is worry. There's sort of a debate between the idea of hope and fear as climate messages. The answer is actually you want both. You want to balance hope and fear to reach worry, because worry is sort of like fear that you haven't done something that you could do. And worry is actually the thing that creates the most engagement. Second thing that generates the most long-term engagement with climate change and mobilizing the public audience is frequency of news stories about climate change. It does not even necessarily determined by the substance of what those stories are, but public discussion about what to do, how to do it, and seeing those stories on a regular basis is the thing that generates the most public engagement. So we just kind of need to keep talking about it to some degree, and we need to have public debates about how to approach the problem in a way that reaches a general audience through mass media.
Stay together. Last one, Duncan. Ad companies promote consumption and unsustainable practices. It is not hypocritical to want to ban fossil fuel ads, but remain silent about others that also harm.
No, the fossil fuel industry is the biggest source of carbon pollution on the planet. And the way to think of it is as the cornerstone of polluting industries. It's the thing that benefits from and enables all the other polluting industries. So all the things we don't like about fast fashion, aviation, unsustainable agriculture, cars, all these things have at their centerpiece oil and gas. This is the industry that benefits from all of that pollution. This is the industry that makes it affordable to do all that pollution. I like to think of it as the keystone. If we can solve the problem of the influence and reach of fossil fuels, it becomes easier to clean up every other industry. It's the thing that opens the door to solve all those other problems. So we do want to figure out what to do about aviation pollution, about pollution from agriculture, about fast fashion, about plastics. But if we solve the problem of fossil fuels, all of that will become a lot easier down the road.
Thank you. We have another question, and I think it's a good one to finish. How can we make climate action more sexy?
Climate action is super sexy. I don't know if you've ever met a climate activist, but the appeal is high. But so here's the reality. People like climate solutions. If you ask people, would you rather power your home on renewable energy or gas? Would you rather drive an electric car or gas? Would you rather have more air pollution or less? People understand these solutions and they tend to like them. The problem is that we have a misinformation problem, that people have been told repeatedly using extremely effective, far-reaching, persuasive tools that these solutions are unreliable, too expensive, impossible. The only thing that works with oil and gas is in your life. There's no way you can get around it. And that's not true. We can actually do away with this industry quite soon if we put our minds to it. We have all the technological innovations we need. And so it's that disinformation that is blocking people from tapping into the things they like about climate solutions that is really standing in the way. So that's really the problem we're trying to solve, that there's a blocking action here that is making it harder for individuals to do the thing and embrace the things they already like, so that we can solve this problem. And that's the primary focus of the misinformation, is to delay the solutions, to convince people that they're not possible, not desirable, etc. So that's what we got.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I have the impression that people like green solutions, especially if they are attached to, sweet taxes, financial
Oh
advantages.
yeah,
So there is
the money
still
helps.
money helps.
Yeah. Surprise, surprise. People like getting free money. I know this is a breaking insight here.
Well, that's a beginning.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Duncan. Thank you for being with us today, for your insights. Congrats for speaking out and for, keeping this positive tone, because the truth is that sometimes we kind of lose hope, and it's pretty encouraging to know that there are so many clean creatives supporting the cause and doing something different with their talents in their creative agencies. Also, immense thanks to our audience as well. Stay tuned because we have more webinars coming in featuring top experts. 13 June, Victoire Rio from Box to Fix will explain her latest From Content to Payment, the rise and implications of social media ad revenue sharing. And Guillaume Coster from our Dear Tech Fest will present on the 20th of June, Operation Overload. Please check how pro-Russian propagandists try to manipulate newsrooms. Before leaving, please just give us an extra minute. You'll have access to a rating survey at the end of the webinar. Also, in that survey, you can suggest future topics to be covered in our EU DisinfoLab series of webinars. We hope seeing you around. Don't forget that the registration to EU DisinfoLab annual conference to be held in Riga in October, it's already open. Thank you very much again, Duncan. And we extend our heartfelt gratitude to the Heinrich Böll Foundation for the support in organizing this event. Have a wonderful rest of the day and see you soon.